It is now. It is 6 in the morning where you are.
Yes. Thanks
It's
a lot.
it's 8 here. I'm really sorry.
It's okay.
But look at my hair. You can see it's all messed up
Oh,
because of the time.
one of the great things about doing all of these Zooms is that you see all these actors without, with bad hair and sometimes with just a beautiful top, and then they get up and they're in their sweats. It's fun.
One of the things I've enjoyed the most is seeing the inside of their houses. I think it's fascinating.
Well, sometimes though, when like they've tried too hard and it looks really fake, or it's really empty, there's nothing, no personality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I want to welcome you to this insane show that we're doing. We're closing in on 11 hours, and it's been tough, but we're surviving it. And 26 years with Cine Premiere, you've been here from the very beginning.
Yes.
I'd like you to tell the listeners right now, or whoever's watching, your origin
Is that
story.
anybody? Is anybody watching?
Yeah, we have 53 people live right now,
Oh my gosh.
and then the video will stay up all for forever.
Uh-oh.
So tell us your origin story. How did you start with Cine Premiere?
Um, well, I got a phone call 26 years ago, sometime in the summer. I got a phone call that one of the heads of Daily Variety, Peter Bart, wanted to know if I would be interested in working for starting up a new Mexican magazine. And I told him I spoke Italian, not really any, I could understand some Spanish, but I didn't speak Spanish. I didn't want to work for a company. I never worked for anyone. I had been freelance my whole life. And he's like, shut up and just come in and talk to me. So I did. And 2 weeks later, I was in Mexico City. And this is how it started. First of all, Charles Oppenheim, who would be my first editor, and I had lunch with him. They arranged a lunch, and it was him and four other gentlemen and a famous actor named Pedro Armendariz Jr. I don't remember the names of the men who were the owners of the magazine at the time, or the heads of the company. And we went to a lunch where they acted like they just wanted to have this really special time with me, but I think what they wanted to do is test me. So they ordered all what they said were the best delicacies of Mexico that I wouldn't have known. And the first thing that came was escamoles,
Uh-huh.
which are the giant ant eggs, I guess.
Ant eggs, yeah.
And the way they described them was even scarier. But the second plate that came were gusanos,
Oh, nice.
which are these giant fried caterpillars. And I looked at them and I thought, okay, I'm the only girl here, and I want to impress these guys, so I'm going to figure out how to do this. And so they handed me a little tortilla with this giant disgusting thing on it, and I just put a lot of hot sauce on it, took the shot of tequila, and ate it without crunching on it.
I've never had one of those.
Well, I'm telling you, as long as those men were attached to the magazine, I was a legend. They always were like so impressed that I did that. And nobody noticed that from then on, all the tortillas I ate had no gusanos on them. I just put hot sauce on them because there was no way I was going to crunch down on that. But that's how I started with the magazine. That was my memory. And then I got back to my hotel room with a bag of cash. They had paid me in advance.
In cash?
A lot more money than now because things were a different time.
Certainly a lot more money than right now.
Yes. And it was a bag of cash, and I was convinced they were drug dealers.
Yeah,
because, they wanted to do a good faith payment in advance. So I think I laid it all out on the bed and called my husband and said, they're drug dealers. That's going to be it. So that's how we started. They were in a basement at Televisa, and it launched from there. They had many different ideas. They thought we needed a big office in Los Angeles, and their big dream was to have a color Xerox machine. They thought that would be a sample of how important and established we were.
A
So that was,
color Xerox. Wow.
yeah. And my job was mostly to hire other writers for a lot of money. I mean, if they did 5 paragraphs, it was like $1,500.
Wow.
I know, I know, different time. And a few months later, the peso crashed, and they said, "Okay, you can't hire writers anymore. You have to just do everything we need out of LA." And that was my trial by fire. That's how I began.
It's a very interesting year when Cine Premiere was founded because, like you just said, it started in September 1994, and in December the peso completely crashed. It's
Yes,
been one of the worst, just economic, just moments we've had in our history. So it's really incredible how the magazine has survived so many crises. That one, then in 2008, and then this one, which we're somehow, I don't know, by some miracle of I don't know what, we're still surviving. But I think I was in earlier, about 2 hours ago, I was talking with Cesar and with Carlos about how everyone who has worked at Cine Premiere really loves it. For some reason,
yes,
this magazine or this publication, for some reason, makes people really fall in love with it.
yes. Well, I'm waiting to get my $1,000,000 as the survivor of City Premiere. I've won the game show.
You certainly have. You have more than $1 million in love from all of us that you can count on.
I have, this is, I don't know if this is even an appropriate story, but yesterday I had an interview with Edward James Olmos,
Mhm.
who has just directed a film about, it's an ecological true story. It's called The Devil Has a Name. And what was ironic is that, so when they had the launch of the magazine in 1994 in October, nobody kind of knew what they were doing. They hadn't been in Hollywood before, and I didn't know what they were doing ahead, or I would have stopped them from this foolishness. But they actually gave $100,000 to a budget of $100,000 to an agent who was promising to get talent to show up for the premiere party for the launch.
Wow. Uh-huh.
And this is just a travesty, because so they paid $75,000 to Nastasia Kinski, who wasn't at a high point of her career at that moment,
Wow.
and $10,000 to James Edward Olmos, who found out later that evening that he had been so underpaid compared to her. Of course, she was a girl, and whatever. That he stormed off. So he didn't come to the party because he was furious, and Nastasia didn't come to the party because she did the press line before and thought that's all she had to do for her money, and got on a plane and went back to Los Angeles.
Oh, wow.
And the agent who set it up, I mean, was long gone. He was some shyster scam artist. I don't know. But I just kept saying to them, you didn't have to do this. You could have done it very differently. And so that was kind of the level, that and wanting to aspire to having a color Xerox machine kind of tells you the level of, naivety that there was when they just thought, let's start a magazine. They didn't really have the things we all know much more now, just because also of the internet, and, that would never happen. But they actually talked to him yesterday. I did not remind him that.
Oh, you should have.
No, I don't know that it would have gone so well, because he was so angry at the time. But he's made a nice movie now. So anyway, those were the early days.
Now, apart from being a writer and journalist, you're also a photographer, and
Yes.
you photographed a couple of our covers.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So very early on, well, in the first place, also the owners of the magazine thought, because I had photographed celebrities in the past, I just remember it's like the second month they called me and said, so we'd like to have Bruce Willis on the cover. Will you just call him and have him come to your house tomorrow? Would be great. And I was like, it doesn't work like that. I can't just call Bruce Willis and say, come Come over for some photos. So, and then like a few weeks later, they were like, okay, well, we want to do that with Selma Hayek. And I called her publicist at the time. She had just signed. She just really was just on the rise. And the publicist was like, no, we only want her to have her first big American cover, or cover that she does now has to be with like Annie Leibovitz. And I'm like, well, I'm who you have. And they actually called Charles Oppenheim in Mexico to say, we don't want somebody to shoot in their house. We don't want somebody who's not, the most famous photographer in America to shoot her cover. And being Selma, because she is so down to earth, and especially then she hadn't gotten so famous at all. She called them back and said, I want to do it for Cine Premiere. I'm going to do what they want to do. So she came here to my house, which is where my studio was set up at the time. She came here I had set up hair and makeup for her. She came here with these beautiful gowns that I had arranged to have here that didn't, because she's really busty, they didn't all zip up the back, but they were beautiful. You've seen the pictures, but she was bigger on top than these little size 3 dresses were. So, and she was still smoking in those days. And she wanted her, I guess her brother or her cousin was going to stop by. She was out in my front yard smoking with her dress, the beautiful pink satin gown unzipped all the way down in the back, smoking and hanging out in the front yard while the teenage boys across the street from me were falling off of their balconies. They were so excited to see this beautiful woman who they didn't even know who she was because she wasn't so well known yet. But she was so down to earth, and she rolled around on the floor with my then dog that was a Scottish Terrier. And it was an amazing, amazing day. She's a totally normal person. So that was my first cover for Cine Premiere.
What year was it? Was it 1996, 97, I think?
No, it was the end of maybe 95, but it was in 96. I think the cover was 96.
Right. And then you did another one with Iñárritu?
Yes, yes. A very different story. It was for 21 grams.
Right.
And Universal called me and asked me if I wanted to do this because they thought it was a good tie-in. It would be their generic that we'd use for Cine Premiere first, but then they'd use it for some other press shots. And he arrived. They wanted like lots of variation. I bought lots of different colored backdrops. The hair and makeup people were getting paid much, much more than I was from Cine Premiere. And he wouldn't let the hair people touch him. His hair looked kind of terrible. Yeah. But the person was just sat there, no, I don't want you to touch my hair. And the only pictures he would let me shoot were with the bullet in his mouth that represented 21 grams. So the cover that we had is a picture of him with a bullet in his mouth. I took 500 photographs of him with a bullet in his mouth. And yes, that's it.
That's the one.
So it wasn't in his mouth in that one, but I have many with it in his mouth. And that was my experience with him. But I have a great story of him many years later. Well, not so many years later, I guess. It must have been many months later because it was before the film came out. I was at the Toronto Film Festival and going to see the screening of his film, 21 Grams. And I knew my very good old friend, Peter Dinklage, had his first movie coming out that he was the star of, which was The Station Agent. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to go support him for the screening and for the after party. And but I had to see 21 Grams. It was my obligation being at the festival. So I got to the screening and I was sitting at the end of the row before the movie started. And I'm there with a bunch of publicists. I can't really sneak out. And someone came to me from the theater and said, "Excuse me, would you mind moving to that that seat over there by the exit? Because we need this seat for a lady in a wheelchair." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I moved over to the seat by the door. The minute it went dark, the screen, the film started, I got up and snuck out of the film and went to meet Peter Dinklage, who, he wasn't so famous. He hadn't done much, but he was really nervous. And there was a big party for him afterwards. And they were just concerned because he's not a tall man. And there's, a lot of people in Canada are very tall. And they just wanted somebody to sort of be there and look after him. So I had this amazing night. We drank and partied all night long, and it was really great. And the next day I get up, and there's a note from the publicist for the movie 21 Grams, who says, I have the biggest favor to give you. It's just amazing. I want you to have lunch with Inarritu, and you can just talk about the movie for like 2 hours. I hadn't seen the film. And I couldn't say I hadn't seen the film because my obligation was to see the film.
Right.
And I was like, oh my God, I'm a loser. I'm just like, that's it. My career is over. I'm going to be in so much trouble. But if you've ever interviewed Inarritu, you know that basically you just push the button and he never stops talking.
He likes to talk.
It was really great to have that. But the second part of this was that when I was finished with him, they had arranged for me to have coffee with Guillermo Arriaga. Guillermo?
Yeah.
Arriaga. And I was like, oh, God, I'm never going to be able to fake it twice. This is never going to happen. But I so admired him then, had never met him. And when we sat down to have coffee, I just told him the truth. And the greatest thing for me was that he said, oh, that's okay. I'm so excited to meet you. I've been reading your column. I love your column.
Really?
And to me,
wow.
That was like, and we have stayed. I mean, like I saw him a few years later in Venice. He had written something with Charlize Theron. And I saw him and he was like, oh, there you are. I'm so happy. It was just so lovely and reassuring and made me feel like I wasn't, a complete flop because I hadn't seen their movie. And I never snuck out of a screening again.
And have you seen it since?
Oh, yes. I saw it because I had to write about it. I mean, that film was sort of the scandal of, well, not the scandal, but it was the talk of Toronto, not because of the filmmakers, but because everyone in Toronto was talking about the breasts of the actress.
Right.
So I guess they were, that was like the most interesting thing to a lot of the critics that year.
Now you've apart from the Pete Dinklage, who I think from, I don't know if you became friends with him because of your work.
Mutual friend.
Okay. But you've also made friends. You've had you're part of the HF. We should probably talk about that first. The HFPA, the Hollywood Foreign Press. You're part of that. Maybe. How does that work? How did you become a member of that?
So I was visiting a publicist. I had started with Cine PREMIERE, and I was visiting a publicist downtown Los Angeles for a movie called Frankie the Fly, which it didn't sort of go anywhere, but it was a wonderful film noirish set. And I was visiting there, and the publicist, who was an old friend, said, now that you're working for this magazine, you should probably join the Hollywood Foreign Press. And I kind of laughed. I'm like, well, first of all, I don't have a big history of working for a magazine. It's not like I wasn't associated with any particular market. I just worked freelance. And also we had been making fun of
there it is. Look at it.
Press for a long time, because there were always these rumors that it wasn't legitimate, which none of which actually turned out to be true. But there was a woman standing next to him named Marianne Ruth, who is a Swedish woman who was very well-known journalist for France. And I didn't know her, and she turned around and said, I'll sponsor you. You should do that. And she and I started talking. We became friends. She later worked for me when I could still hire people with Cine PREMIERE. She worked for me for a couple of years. She wrote stories for us. And she sponsored me, and I got in, and which is funny because it's so legendary how difficult it is to join. Yeah. But there wasn't any competition in Mexico at the time. There was the one man who, my other sponsor, as it turned out, Jorge Camara, was Mexican, but he didn't write for Mexico. So he wrote for Santo Domingo and the Dominican Republic. So that's, that was how I became a member. And it's been great because it opened so many doors.
Well, it
access.
recently we had the bit of news coming out that it was a cartel, or what did they compare it with?
Yeah, and I can't really I can't really say anything about it, but it was a really bogus, I mean, the strangest thing was that the journalist who filed the lawsuit and made all those accusations filed the lawsuit before, I mean, many people had to apply 3 times to get in over the years. And sometimes it's just how it works out. You know, sometimes they didn't at that moment didn't qualify, or there were too many other applicants. But she filed the lawsuit before we voted. So she kind of shot herself in the foot because she probably would have gotten in the 3rd time.
Oh, that's
But it was kind of anyway. So that's still ongoing. I'm not allowed to talk about it, but
but I can laugh about it.
we've laughed a lot in this house, and I've told my dog all the secrets.
So, what I was gonna say before this is you've had the opportunity to meet a lot of people. I'm wondering, because I know this is something that a lot of people will want to know. Have you become friends with these celebrities, with actors? Is there a chance to really go beyond that just work relationship?
Well, sometimes, but not, you know, what happens, you see this with a lot of journalists, is where they think that person is their friend because they're nice to them. And that is not always the case. But then there are people who you become, maybe you're not going to their house for dinner at Lake Como, for example, but where you develop a relationship. So before, I guess, before I was a member, or maybe just at the beginning of being a member, um, I got a traffic ticket, which at that time you couldn't do online driving school to get out of your ticket. You had to actually go somewhere physically and spend the whole damn weekend, all day Saturday and Sunday. And you had to stand up and say, I think like probably an AA meeting, you know, my name is Vera, I'm a journalist, a photojournalist, and I was you know, I made a bad left turn or whatever. So at the end of the day, this man came up to me, and I thought he was kind of flirting. He was kind of an annoying guy, and he just came up, and everybody looks bad because they've been, you know, they don't want to be there anyway. He came up and he said, "So you're a film journalist, and I'm a publicist. We should talk." And he gave me his card, and I just thought, what a jerk, you know. And then I looked at the card. His name's Stan Rosenfield. We're good friends now. And so I asked somebody that I knew through work, I'm like, have you ever heard of this guy? And they're like, oh yeah, he's the publicist for John Goodman, Bobby De Niro, George Clooney,
Wow.
all the men's men. And I'm like, oh, oh. So, um, so I called him and I photographed John Goodman like 2 weeks later for him, and we became friends. And so the first time through the HFPA that I was on a set where George Clooney was, I thought, oh, this is a good way to make him remember me. And I told him, I said, oh, by the way, do you know that your publicist is an alley speeder? And so we laughed about that. But he did, you know, it started that way because it was on a more personal level. And over the years, I've had a lot of set visits with him in different countries. We've had time together, but definitely there's a relationship. A story that maybe isn't that interesting to anybody but me, but a few years ago when we had a dog that was at the time of Argo, we had a dog who had a disease and was unwell, and we went to the premiere party, and you know, I was happy to see George. I went up to say hello to him. And then I suddenly realized the time that our dog had just started a new medicine. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't talk to you, George. I have to go because Dexter needs to have pills at exactly 10 o'clock. And these women standing around were looking at me like, what is the matter with her? She's walking away from George Clooney. And George just laughed and he said, you know, no woman has ever told me that she had to leave me for a dog.
Wow.
So that was like in a November event. And at the Golden Globes, 2 months later, he saw me in the hall and he walked up to me and he said, how's Dexter? And that's the thing about George Clooney anyway, is that he's such a great guy. But he remembered not only the dog, but he remembered my dog's name, which I thought was kind of the coolest thing.
That's amazing.
But also over the years, he's somebody who has shared stories of his pranks. I think we were on the set of Monuments Men in Germany when he told a hilarious story about Matt Damon and a really kind of mean-spirited trick he played on him. Because I guess Matt Damon was getting ready to have his renewing his vows of his marriage, and he had been dieting because he'd gotten a little pudgy, and he was dieting really strenuously. And every couple of days he'd come in and say, "I don't know what I'm doing wrong. My pants keep getting tighter and tighter. I'm starving myself to death." And George had been paying the
Oh no.
costumer to make his pants tighter
Wow.
every day. And those are the kind of stories that he doesn't necessarily share with everybody. So I always felt that there's a relationship there. But, like I said, I'm not invited to dinner at Lake Como. So
that's amazing.
that is a good prank.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit of, you mentioned the Golden Globes. What is that? What is the process for that? Like you are part of the organizers. Yeah.
We vote. And it's going to be really interesting this year to see what happens, because we postponed the awards, but also, I mean, there's a debate about we can't just have television awards. We're part of, there's some films that have come out this year that are, deserve attention. You can't just have it be for the blockbusters, but, is it going to be like 6 films? I mean, what do you do? Because there's some great early films that should be in contention, but you vote on the films, you see all the movies, all of us, especially, all of us have jobs that we do for the Globes. When you were there with me, I mean, I was working production backstage. It's not just, it's not just a party. It's also a lot of work to make a production like that come together.
I gotta stop you for a second. Just show you the wallpaper of my phone is our night at the Golden Globes.
It was a good night.
It's one of the best nights of my life, and especially this year.
Who knows what's ahead of us, Ivan? But it might be the last Golden Globes. You never know. So you got to be there.
Have there been any discussions of which way they're leaning? What might?
Well, so it's going to be an ongoing conversation, because for NBC, I'm sure, they're not, if they go virtual, they're not going to get the same kind of, the production isn't going to get the same kind of money from NBC if it's virtual. But we've had some really good virtual shows. I mean, from the Emmys did an okay job. Saturday Night Live is, Stephen Colbert. People are making it work. Sometimes it's awkward, sometimes it doesn't work. But I think there's a way to do it. It just isn't going to be this glamorous affair where we all get to bring guests and, but we don't know yet, because we thought in March and April, did any of us think this would still be going on now? No. So, I mean, in LA, you see people out sitting in bars outside, and they don't look socially distanced. And I mean, I don't think people aren't serious enough.
I thought
I have friends in Budapest that are a man that's in the hospital right now that just found out he has COVID. So and they were so happy there, because they were past the problem. Nobody's past the problem.
I thought people in LA and California were taking it it was just most of the country wasn't, but I thought California was.
Well, then you see pictures of the beach. On the beach days, we had a heat wave, and with unbreathable air from the fires, and yet you saw people packed like sardines at the beach.
Wow.
It's hit or miss.
Yeah.
I don't feel comfortable going out. So
it has certainly changed everything, especially for someone like you who you were out on the road. I don't know, 90% of the time.
The last 2 years, if I had 2 weekends in a row in LA, it was a miracle. And we had 3 trips right backed up to we had New York, then London, then New York, and then immediately shut down. And it's like my whole life ended.
Yeah.
It's so bizarre. And taking photographs, so it's not the same at all now doing it online.
What was your last face-to-face interview?
Okay, so we had I had John Krasinski and Emily Blunt in New York. Then we had London, The Crown set visit. And then I got home on the 3rd of March for that, and went immediately 2 days later to New York for Ben Affleck.
For the way back?
The way back.
Yeah.
And came home, and 2 days after that, we were in lockdown.
Wow.
And, I mean, I went 125,000 air miles last year. and I have lots of certificates for upgrades. Will I ever get to use them? Obviously it'll come back in some way, but it's never going to be the same.
Yeah.
It's never going to be the same. So who knows?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I got to be home with my dog and my husband. And, not that I ever wanted to cook this much food in my entire life, but I miss hotels. I miss the hotel life. And
you've also had some virtual premieres and parties.
Well, I mean, it's kind of, sometimes it's okay, but it's kind of, they're really trying hard. But we just had a set visit that was, I don't know, it's definitely not the same. That's all I want to say. It's a stretch.
Yeah.
And you're not getting, you're not getting anything unique, because when you're on a set, maybe, something will happen where you get to see something spontaneous, or you're walking out to get a bottle of water and you run into somebody from the cast inadvertently. I remember on Les Mis running into Hugh Jackman, because he was just standing outside to get some fresh air, and he was there in his big puffy shirt costume that we weren't allowed to photograph him in. We weren't even supposed to see him in it. And I got to talk to him for 5 minutes just because I was there. You're not going to get that when it's totally orchestrated, virtual.
Yeah. Or walking around a set and just looking around, and every person is going to see something different.
Right. And it's the same with interviews. I mean, when I first started with Cine Premiere, I mean, I had never done junkets. I didn't go to journalism school. I had written some articles. I had published a book, not about film stuff. So I was a writer, but I didn't have I didn't know what it would be like to sit at a table at a junket with like 5 other journalists. And I was intimidated that they all would be smarter and better than me. And the 2 junkets I had John Travolta for one, and I had Robin Williams for the other one. And with John Travolta, which was my very first junket, I get to the table, and these, I won't say where they were from, but it was kind of like a stereotype of these certain journalists from another country, where they were asking like, what kind of, did he wear tighty whities, and what kind of cereal did he eat for breakfast? And I just thought, okay, I don't need to be intimidated anymore. This is crazy. But the second one was Robin Williams, and we got stuck in an elevator at the Four Seasons Hotel. I got into the elevator, and I didn't see there's somebody with his back to me was there, and he was looking at some piece of paper, and we went up halfway to the next floor, and it shut. And we were only in there for like 2 minutes, but by the time we got out of that elevator, it's like we had grown up together.
Oh my
because we're
God.
both from Northern California. He just had me dying with laughter. It was for because it's the middle of the night and I'm not remembering them, but the Birdcage. It was for Birdcage. And when we went into that table and sat down, he only answered my questions. He only talked to me. It was like I had died and gone to heaven. I was like, okay, this is how it's always going to be. Not true. But those kind of experiences don't happen in a virtual interview.
Yeah, no.
It's never going to be the same. One of my first junkets was for The Perfect Storm, and I thought it was always going to be like that, sitting outside with Mark Wahlberg and George Clooney eating lobster in Gloucester, with real guys who had been with the Coast Guard in the epic event that caused that movie to happen. And I was like, my life has changed. So I'm going to be eating lobster with, George Clooney and Mark Wahlberg forever. And none of that's going to happen. I mean, now we're really lucky if they give us a credit for delivery service for lunch.
Yeah.
You can call up Postmates and have, a sandwich delivered to your house. and that's like a big, it's happened like 4 times. Um, it's it's not the same as, you know, not that you need to be spoiled, but you need to have that extra thing that makes you be able to tell these stories
Yeah.
about celebrities to make it personal. And
Yes.
seeing the books on their shelf in a virtual interview is not the same,
No.
you know?
I mean, it is fun to see what they have in their
Yes.
houses, but it's definitely never the same.
Yeah.
Now, you're also a filmmaker,
Yes.
and you have a film.
I'm gonna cry now.
Why are you gonna cry?
Yeah. So, I guess like 20 years ago, so we made a film. My then boyfriend, now husband, wrote and directed it. I produced it. We made it for, in some worlds, seems like a lot of money for like $500,000, but it wasn't really. It wasn't cash. It was a lot of it was credit and promises. But but we made a film. Everybody got paid except us, and it was a little tiny LA story. It was also a multicultural story that would have probably had a better slot now in the market, but we got great reviews. It was scheduled to come out just after 9/11, but the very small distributor that we had kind of lost his shirt in 9/11. Their private banker was in the World Trade Center, and they lost the funding. So, I mean, everything went south. We hadn't signed a contract. So the film came out on DVD, and you can find it if you look really hard. It's called The Dog Walker. There are 3 dog walkers. There's the one that's the porn film, not ours. There's the one that's just on video, and ours is shot on film, and it's called The Dog Walker, directed by Paul Duran. But at the time you do something like that, and it's such an accomplishment, you're so proud, and you think your life is going to change, and you can't really bitch about 9/11 happening, and you can't really bitch about the pandemic happening. It's not what any of us want or wanted, but it's life. So you just have to keep going. Did I think I'd be in the HFPA forever or still working for Cine Premiere? Probably not. But it's you just have to sort of go with the flow.
That's an interesting question. What were you thinking when you first got the Cine Premiere job? Were you thinking it was going to last for how long or?
Well, I had never
There's your
worked.
poster, I think.
Oh, yeah. I had never worked for. Uh, I had always done freelance, so I had never worked for a company. And they were talking about, they wanted to have a big office, and I was like, I just want to work from home. I didn't want that kind of structure, but I love the idea. I mean, and like you said, people just fall in love with working for the magazine. I became so attached to it. I got really defensive when a publicist at the time, who's no longer with us, but she's known to be like one of the real hard asses, that we later became friends. But she was like, well, how can you be working for a Mexican magazine when you don't really speak Spanish? And I'm like, well, I'm finding my way, and I'm here to defend the culture. How dare you even ask that question? Because would you have let me come in to pick your brain this way if I was someone you didn't even, you'd never heard of? And I mean, you knew me socially, and so I had a chance to get my foot in the door, which is why I think they chose me, is that I sort of knew the celebrity scene here. But I also, I mean, in the beginning, I took Spanish tutoring, and then when the peso crashed and they cut my money down horribly, I couldn't afford the tutoring anymore. And I still dabble with online classes, and I can read pretty fluently. I can do okay. I gave an interview when I was there in Guadalajara last year. I gave an interview hilariously in Spanish, where I apologized for being tired, but in fact I said I was pregnant. So I I just do the best I can, but it hasn't seemed to slow me down. So I love the magazine. I will work forever for it, as long as we can survive the hurdles. And hopefully in America, we're going to have a change of politics that might loosen things up a little. And maybe we'll have an upswing that will trickle down to Mexico.
I hope so, because we really need some of that.
Yeah, me too. Because I'm essentially, I'm not taking photographs. I mean, it's like everything's dried up. So
yeah,
90% of my colleagues, I mean, we'll see what happens, but 90% of them, their magazines are shut down completely.
Well, yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
So, print media is hanging by a thread.
Oh yeah, it's tough. It's tough to continue printing. But on the writer side, what are some of your favorite interviews of these 26 years? Your favorite, press events, or I mean, there's a very big difference between a press event, because you might say, I don't know, going to some crazy place, but the movie wasn't that good, or the interviews weren't that good.
Well, often the best press, the best junkets or press events are the worst movies. That's just the sad truth.
They have money to cover up their badness.
Yeah, and they make strange choices. Some of my favorite interviews, Bill Murray.
Oh, that must be amazing.
Is always great. And that's another. I was actually stuck in an elevator with Bill Murray. The year I joined the magazine, my friend who works at Variety, Steve Gatos, took me to the LA Film Critics lunch. And but we didn't arrive together. So when I went to leave, I got in the elevator at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, and who got in the elevator with me was Bill Murray. And we were up at, I guess, the top floor, something like that. So came down a few floors, and then it just went stop like that. And Bill Murray is an icon. He's just this, whether you like his movies, know his movies, you just know that he's a character.
Yeah.
And he just turned to me, and it was really just such a short moment that we were stuck before it started up again. But he turned to me, he had a bottle of champagne under his arm, and he had red vine licorice twists, like at the movies, in his pocket, like a foulard, like a scarf in his pocket. But they were just sticking out there. And he pulled one out and said, "Want a red vine?" And he said, "We could have champagne too, but we'd have to drink out of the bottle."
Oh, wow. I can hear it in his voice, though.
Yeah. And then we went the rest of the way down. But, those are the kind of moments here that you have where, being in LA, you're going to run into people. I mean, I used to take my former dog to a holistic vet, and I talked to a man in the waiting room, and it was Gregory Peck.
Wow.
That doesn't happen just in rat's ass middle America. It happens because you're in LA.
Yeah.
So, and the same with Sundance, although Sundance has changed now. My first years at Sundance, I shared a shuttle, just a shuttle, like for normal people. I shared a shuttle with Al Pacino.
Wow.
Now it's all red carpets.
Yeah.
But those kind of experiences do happen. And I think they happen it'll happen at Starbucks, it'll happen at, the hamburger stand, whatever, where you meet people. So I like those kind of encounters. I like the non-formal encounters. Those are my favorite stories, I think. I met Viggo Mortensen, who became a lifelong friend, at a little, I guess, performance show. His ex-wife, Exene Cervenka, who was with the seminal LA punk band X, she co-owned a store in Silver Lake called You've Got Bad Taste. And they were having an event there. It was like funky, weird pop art stuff. And she was going to sing a song, and Viggo was doing the lighting. And it was just around the time, I think, he was just becoming really well known, but he's never become like a superstar attitude. But we started talking. He really loved the idea that I worked for Mexico. And we decided we would get together a few days later. And I didn't think that it was that anything that special until I told whoever was my editor at the time, who was like, "Oh my God, you're going to go have coffee with Viggo Mortensen. That's such a big deal." But I went to see him where he arrived at this little library in Venice Beach. He arrived barefoot. We sat and talked. I took some pictures. Few months later, my door knocked at 10 o'clock at night. Paul was here. We were, I guess we were living together by then. And Viggo had come to read me a poem he'd written.
What?
He stopped by because he was in the neighborhood. It's a favorite story of my husband's because he likes to make it sound like, he won the girl from Viggo, but it wasn't like that at all. But we stayed friends when we ran into him in Rome at the Rome Film Festival years later. He was so gracious and stayed. We had dinner together. He invited us to have VIP seats at the premiere of a terrible movie that he made called A la Triste. I think it was a Spanish Musketeer movie that was about 3.5 hours long. And we had wonderful seats right behind him, so we could neither mock the movie or sneak out. But he treated us like close friends. And the next time I saw him, not in a press situation, he was on a red eye at night in economy class with a friend because they didn't want to, I guess, spring for the $10,000 business class seat because he's a normal guy, and those are the kinds of, and I met him, at that shop. So maybe if I'd met him the first time at an HFPA event, it wouldn't have been the same.
Yeah, it's different. It's got to be definitely different. And do you remember any interview or meeting that is just one of these bizarre, strange things that you remember, but I mean, it might have even been a dream because it's so weird?
Well, half an hour with Robert De Niro back when they would give you half an hour. And he only said like 5 words the whole time. Well, no.
Oh my God.
No. And I was also pretty new. I didn't know how to get through it. But weird on another level. Can't think of any of the names. When Russell Crowe played the tobacco movie,
The Insider.
The Insider. I had an interview back to back with Russell Crowe. I had an interview with the real guy, Jeffrey Wigand, and it was at a hotel in LA. There was an FBI guy at the door. There was major security. He was still on a hit list from some tobacco industry fanatic.
Wow.
Because he was really an informer.
Yeah.
And what was interesting to me was talking to him. I didn't have a big history with Russell Crowe yet, but I kept thinking, wait, is this Russell Crowe? Russell Crowe had embodied him so completely on the film that sitting with Jeffrey Wigand, and then there's all kinds of questions you want to ask somebody who's in that. I mean, that's a pretty amazing thing. You don't get access to people like that. Although over the years, there's been a few CIA people. And
well, you just got James Comey, no?
That was virtual. That was amazing. I mean, a lot of people hate James Comey, but he's a very smart man and he's a great interview. So, and there were a lot of questions. You'd ask better questions in person with someone like that because you could read them better and you could, jump on you. Also, when you're virtual, you have the publicist breathing down your neck sort of the whole time because they're right there with you, So
they're there in the call even.
Yeah.
So if you ask something they don't like, they can just shut you off immediately.
And sort of with the HFPA, we've had it happen over the years where, a publicist has stood up and said, "Oh no personal questions." And with the HFPA, it's like, that's a one thing too, because they'll back down because of the Golden Globes. They don't want to offend you, but it's like if if an actor doesn't want to say anything about their personal life, they can just say, I'm not going to answer that.
Yeah.
And people who've learned how to do that graciously, are much more successful in their interviews than actors who get all pissy about it.
Get up and leave.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before I let you go, because we're coming up on the end now, I want to mention a few of the people who've been watching with us. Roberto Hernandez says Vera is so professional.
Yeah, I'm reading it.
And it's now amazing to find out she's also a lovely person. See, they thank you for your work. There's a lot of love for your column, Hollywood Boulevard, that's been around forever. Entretenimiento con perspectiva. Also, Manolo Lozano contributed. We have the super chat open. That's where people can donate to the cause, so we can try to stay alive. Thank you.
I'll send my $5 now.
No, you don't send anything.
I'm kidding.
Oh no, it has to go the other way around. Leon Kane, wonderful stories, Vera. Thank you for sharing. And I want to personally thank you on a personal note, for everything you do, all the things you've taught me and given me and taken me in places you've taken me. And for the work you do, which is amazing. It's incredible.
Not to interrupt you, Ivan, but you just reminded me of, Rutger Hauer saying, if you could see all the things I've seen, all the places you've taken. I just want to quickly give a shout out to one other, because you were asking about any anecdotes.
Yeah.
I just want to say this about Gerard Butler, because I love this story and I had forgotten about it till right now. But years ago, there was a movie he made with Katherine Heigl. And we were having it's not a memorable movie, but we were having the interviews for it at the Four Seasons Hotel. And apparently there was a famous someone from the Arab Emirates that was his whole entourage and his 5 wives or whatever were staying on the top 3 floors. And there was a bomb scare, a very credible bomb scare. So we were in the interview with Gerard Butler. Katherine Heigl was like in the waiting room, primping. And we all had to evacuate. And they evacuated us to that strip of grass between in the Burton Way, the street that the hotel is on. And so you had the chefs, you had all these, people in chef's hat, you had all the guests of the hotel. Everyone was out on the lawn. And Gerard Butler came out and he was hilarious. He came out with us and hung out. We were there about an hour. We weren't allowed to leave because you're still being questioned. They're trying to find out what's going on. Katherine Heigl sat in a limousine on the side of the road and wouldn't come out and talk to anyone. And she was really, very huffy about it. But he was such a great guy that he went, and people that were nervous, people who had kids who had been in the pool, he went and talked to everybody there and was such a normal guy. And now whenever we see him at any time, he remembers that he bonded with people seriously. And that's the difference. That's the thing I want to say, is that's one of the great things about this work, is you get those moments where you get to see who somebody really is.
Yeah. And you also realize, we were talking about that earlier on last night, you realize that the people who make it the furthest in Hollywood are usually the nicest.
Right.
There is a strong correlation between being nice and being a big star. Hey,
George Clooney remembered my dog's name.
Right.
What can I say?
Exactly. Well, I'm going to let you go now. Thank you very much, Vera, for waking up at 6 a.m, your time.
I woke up a little before then. Take off the night.
And everything you do. And thank you.
Well, I hope to have a long life still ahead with Cine Premiere.
As long as you are willing to be with us.
And as long as you're willing.
Yes. 100%. Thank you very much.
Thanks to all of our fans.
Yes, and people love you. Well, you experienced it in Guadalajara when you were there. People really do love you. So I think everyone was really happy to see you here. And the video is going to be up on our YouTube channel, so more people will see it eventually.
Scary. Love you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.